Hello, I'm Keiran Goddard, and I'm really pleased to be here to talk to Ali Lewis about his debut collection, Absence, which is the latest collection to be brought out on the already formidable CHEERIO poetry list. So firstly, Ali, congratulations on the collection, which I really enjoyed. I was really drawn to your collection's delicacy. Above all else, I think there's a real boldness in writing writing so quietly and so sparsely. I think that kind of attention to lyricism, to repetition, to refrain is a really brave move, and because it really puts so much weight on each individual word. There's very few places to hide in your collection, and I thought there was a really particularly good example of that quality was the poem Living Without Moon. So I wonder if we could kick things off with a reading of that, and then maybe you could talk a little bit about what you were hoping to achieve with that poem.
Yeah, absolutely, that sounds great. Thanks so much for saying such lovely things about my book and for taking the time to talk to me. So I'll read Living Without Moon. This was I think it was the last poem to go into the book, this. Living Without Moon. I looked at the moon, but there was no moon, only a telescopic circle of black, a black circle on black, inlaid with clouds, like a wall where a picture doesn't hang, or a seamless mottled half or crescent, strange as a friend without glasses, or a no shape, no thing, the unthinkable after-imagining I ask myself not to seek, when the times I can't see it coincide with the times it's not there.
Yeah, I really love that poem, Ali. I really love that no shape, no thing, after imagining, that kind of internal rhyme. And there's a kind of pile up of negations almost in that poem.
Yeah, so this poem was basically an attempt to describe, it was basically an attempt to describe a depressive episode. So it's quite a downbeat poem. But I think one of the things about depression is it is a negation, it's a negative, and that makes it a very difficult thing to describe to someone. How do you show a kind of gap or an absence? So it's similar to the poem that's opposite it, which is called An Experiment on a Bird in the Air Pump, and that's about an experiment where somebody created a vacuum pump, and to demonstrate that the vacuum pump was working, they placed a bird inside the chamber of the pump, and then the bird dies because the air is withdrawn, and that is a way of demonstrating that this chamber is empty, which otherwise is almost impossible to prove. So I thought, how can I attempt to show this emptiness without resorting to the metaphor of say the bird or anything else. So this unthinkable after imagining is I guess, I don't know if have you ever tried to think about absolutely nothing, like a blankness or empty space, and your mind can't do it?
Yeah, depression's a really good example of that, I think, and maybe even pain more generally.
Yeah.
But it points at what to me is the sort of essential paradox of the book that you're sort of driving at, which is this sense of how do you make absence into presence, like a present absence. And there are kind of ways that spring to mind. I was thinking about this as I was reading your book, like the act of memorializing, in a way, like a gravestone is like an absence made present, right? It's
I think one of the ways, this is something I was thinking about a lot when I was writing the book, and absence on its own is kind of impossible to think about, but absence with an outline, some kind of shape, so you know what it is that isn't there, is one way of doing that. So in this poem, you have the wall where a picture doesn't hang, and everyone's seen, move out of a house, and you take pictures down, and there's a slightly whiter or non-dirty bit of wall behind that, and so it's not so much the absence I find interesting. It's evidence that it's not there. Something's not there anymore. Like a ghost town or something. If you go to a ghost town somewhere deserted, it's not the fact that there's nobody there, because there's loads of spaces nowhere there, and it's not the buildings, because we see the same buildings everywhere. It's the combination of those two. You go there and you think, this is normal, or normal-ish, except there's nothing there, but we know the shape of that absence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, we can come back to that, because I think it's as I say, I think it's the heart of the book, but it strikes me that part of what makes this collection so powerful, I think, is that there is that like ontological question at the centre of it, that kind of absence presence dichotomy. Is that sort of theory of mind question, I guess. It's like, is what constitutes the cup, right? Yeah. It's like, it's not the cup without the negative space that holds the thing. And I thought, to press on this a little bit more, there was a poem that I thought did it really well. And there's the two of them actually with the same title, which is the love poem to your self-sufficiency. I wondered if you could read like both of those actually, and then make a comment about them having the same title, because I noticed there were quite a few pairs of poems in the collection.
Yeah, I'll read the poems first, and then I'll talk about them a little bit.
Love poem to your self-sufficiency. I happened once on you reading, focusing so closely, the room receded to the line, and I was able to go unnoticed. Watch your hand on the page and think of the times it was me who was memorized, traced. When I felt your attention as the substance of prayer. But to concentrate on your own life's work is another form of faith. It is what it looks like when a person knows they're safe. This poem is also called Love Poem to Your Self-Sufficiency. Love poem to your self-sufficiency. Stand in a field long enough and the sounds start up again, as they do when, at times, I sit quiet in another room and you forget me eventually and start to hum, talk to yourself, cajoling, motivating, praising, and knowing that to call attention to a thing is as often to kill as to save it. I say nothing. Enjoy the sound of you without me, happy.
So you were asking about the pairing in the books. So the initial title of this collection, when I kind of pitched it to CHEERIO, it was called By Twos. And there was lots of dualities in the collection. The collection contains lots of double sonnets. That is pairs of sonnets on facing pages, which kind of talk to each other. I think the reason that I wanted to do that is there's a tension in poems, in what people want from poems. In the traditional demand of a poem is you have some completed, elegant thought, some little bit of wisdom you can put in your pocket, right?
The lock clicking shot.
Exactly. And on the other hand, there's a more recent demand that a poem kind of follows the shape of a thought and is more true to life in that sense. And I wondered how you could bring those two things together, get some kind of satisfaction, some kind of unity in form, but also be true to the kind of messiness and disagreement with the self, which characterises most thought, everyone's thought really. It's all messy, even listening to a conversation, it's constant corrections. Yeah. So I thought one way to have those two things together would be to just have two cracks at a poem and publish both of them, I guess. So you get the doubt, but you try and hold on to the unity of the thoughts. So it's like, instead of one poem that doubts itself, it's kind of two poems disagreeing with each other, or not even disagreeing with each other. Sometimes it's just slight angles on the same thing. And of course you get two poems for one idea. So
I love that. I think one of the few spaces you actually see that process happening, oddly enough, is in country music. It's one of the few cultural spaces, because the concept of the duet still exists, where you've got two different voices essentially singing the same song, not necessarily in call and response, but slightly askance from one another, like problematizing one another's, lines. Sorry, go.
I was just going to say, and sometimes we don't even need to change anything about what they're saying. Just put it in a different person's mouth, and it's a completely different meaning.
100%. Yeah. There's in the second of those, there's that lovely line about, you know, if you sort of stand for long enough, like the sort of silence starts speaking again, which is like one, evidently true.
Yeah.
But it begs the question, I think, again about this idea of absence, because there's a kind of theory of mind question around absence where there's a question about whether it's a sensory experience or it's an intellectual deduction. So to put it concretely, is silence something you hear, or are you just noticing the absence of sound? When you park your car and you go back and your car is not there, do you see the absence of your car, or are you deducing the fact that your car is no longer there? And I don't think that's a resolvable question, but it seems like you're sort of pushing at those ideas to an extent.
Yeah, I think we could only... I would tend towards the deduction side of it, because I think we can only perceive things that are there. So, I mean, on a certain level, things do come together in the sense that silence and cold and stillness are all the same thing on a physical level. They're all just something not vibrating.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So silence and cold are the same as still, basically. So we are just perceiving very low movement or very low, very low movement, basically, in every instance. And so if you do stop somewhere, like in those lines, which are actually taken from a Dana Gioia poem, Becoming a Redwood, what seems like silence is often just the limits of your attention or the limits of your ability to listen at that particular moment. So you can never really attain silence, but you can hear quieter things, I think.
I love that. I love that there really is kind of like thresholds of movement, you know, and at a certain point it maybe takes on the quality of absence, but it's relative to one's attention.
And also to one's capabilities. I mean, what is silent to us, to a creature much smaller than us, is deafening, or if you think of visual phenomena, you know, there are whole worlds down there on a perfectly clean work surface. Yeah. Or it's just that we don't operate on that plane, or we don't have the correct sensory capacities for it. Yeah. I was talking to my mum the other day, and she's fascinated in biology, and she was talking about some beaked whales which have got antlers or kind of long teeth in their skull, but not visible because the skin and the blubber is over them. And everyone was wondering why they were there, what's the purpose of them. And they are kind of a sexually dimorphic attraction mechanism, you know, males with larger antlers that are more attractive apparently. But how do they see them? It's the fact that the whales themselves use sonar, so it's perfectly visible to them that there are antlers inside that head. It's just we don't know what they are, because we always use the metaphor of our own senses, and it's almost impossible to escape from our own senses and try and sense like some other animal or other creature. Yeah, absolutely. And there's an inbuilt hierarchy to the way we think about it, right? Where whenever we're analysing the perception of a different type of animal, we come at it from the limits of our own senses, as if we are the thing that can perceive most things. Yeah, and you have the visual hierarchy. Like vision is, for some reason, well, because our vision typically is our strongest sense. We think that's the most important one for everybody. When of course it doesn't have to be at all. And there is, I think, I did want to in those poems I wanted to pay particular attention to quiet, as well as the physical absence that we think of more readily. I'm sort of, in a way, like contractually obliged as a sort of leftist man in my 30s to mention Mark Fisher. I think it's just, you can't speak publicly without mentioning him, but your book brought to mind his work on like the weird and the eerie. I don't know if you know this, but he makes the distinction that when something is there that's not supposed to be there, it's weird. Yeah. And when something is not there that you expect to be there, it's eerie. So if you walk into a bar and there's a cow there, that's weird. Yeah.
If you walk into a dairy farm and there are no cows, that's eerie. It's just like an empty dairy farm. And your book got me thinking about that, because I think so often, especially contemporary poetry, exists in this space of the weird.
Yeah.
Like, what's this shocking image? What's this like out of place metaphor? Whereas your book, I think, is interestingly tilted towards the eerie, towards these kind of missing aspects.
Yeah, I want to find out what happens when you take things away. So I think we're probably going to talk about, I think you're probably angling towards a poem we're going to talk about in a minute, which is the Orange Vendor.
Yes, that's right.
Which I'll read in a minute. So there is that sense of taking something away, creating something eerie. But I was also interested in that from a narrative perspective. So when you're creating a narrative in poetry, and I'm sure it's the same, or maybe it is the same in novels or short stories, you might start off with something which seems stable, a stable pattern, and one way to upset that stability is to add something to make it weird. But another way of upsetting some fixed tableau is to just take something away and see what happens. I mean, in I See Buildings Fall Like Lightning, like buildings falling is a pretty good example of taking something away and it upsetting things. And do you know the idea that there are kind of two plots? I don't believe any of these things about there's two plots, there's seven plots or anything like that. It's all just a certain level of abstraction. Something becomes true, but not true, like only trivially true. But this old idea that there are two plots. One is a stranger comes to town, and one is a person goes on an adventure. Yeah. And they're both the same story, told from different perspectives.
Absolutely.
One is weird and one is eerie.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think when I think of the weird, putting something that isn't supposed to be there, I think of poets like Mark Waldron with his moose in the chip shop and that kind of thing.
Which is like, in a weird way, the kind of like an inverse to like Elizabeth Bishop's moose, which is like never quite there, right? You never sort of see it. Do read the Orange Vendor for us. I think this is really good. I mean, and specifically the kind of use of the repetition I absolutely love in this. I'm sort of obsessed with just using the same word over and over.
The Orange Vendor. Oranges on her head and oranges in her hand, flowers on a yellow poncho. She's so much smaller than her clothes. I don't know why I bought the print. Is it her one free hand, or the way she stacks so many things, the wrong shape for balancing? Or how she shifts her weight to cope when she makes a sale, and an orange, or many oranges, are taken away.